Okay, welcome to the Council Committees meeting, Monday, April 24th. Roll call shows that Councilors Kenny, Laraway, Berthasel, Marks are in chambers with me, Jeff Wingard. Councilor Demerit will be joining us online. Councilor Robertson will not be with us. We have three separate committee sections tonight, starting with Community Development Committee. Item A is request to resolve or proclaim the town's support for the University of Maine system graduate student efforts to unionize. And this is in response to a community request, a citizen's request, and also a request from council members to discuss the town's potential response to the labor organization movement involving graduate students at the University of Maine. So I think we have read the request that was sent to us from the representative of the graduate student union.
There he is.
And he's coming in. Perfect.
Hey, Harrison.
Hey, Harrison.
Nice waiters. Straight from the field.
Perfect.
Wow.
So we could be a little less formal in committee. So should we hear from the petitioner first, or would councilors like to discuss this first? Since Harrison is
Fine
here.
either way, yeah.
Yeah, since Harrison is here, we've read your email, and maybe you could share with us thoughts or any updates or any other concerns you have.
Yeah, sure.
Should you come to the table?
Right over there, that would be great.
Then we can see your face on camera for people joining over Zoom.
Sit down.
Yeah, come join me.
Come join us.
Or you might as well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get this chair all dirty with vernal pool.
All right.
Hello, thanks for hearing my petition. Again, my name's Harrison. I'm an Orono town resident. I live at 7 Cassidy Lane, just near Webster Park. And I'm a graduate student at the University of Maine, PhD student in ecology and environmental science. I study small wetlands and little creatures that use them. And that's where I came from today. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to listen to what we have to say about the state of graduate workers at the University of Maine and the University of Maine system. So I don't really have a prepared speech or remarks or anything. So I thought I would just kind of catch you up to speed as to why this is happening, how it took shape, and where things are hopefully headed. So graduate workers, this kind of started a little over a year ago with graduate students, TAs, teaching assistants in the biology department at the University of Maine here in Orono, who were all kind of sharing the same concerns and difficulties with essentially being overworked and being assigned much more teaching loads for these very large introductory classes than they were expecting, or more than they are supposed to be teaching based on, the terms of their teaching assistantship. And we're talking really full-time days or more than full-time days for all the teaching responsibilities that go with teaching large undergraduate courses. They tried to address this with various folks in their department. It never got anywhere. It was just kind of the way it was and the way it was going to be. And then, an idea took hold that maybe other folks, other graduate workers are dealing with similar situations. And so they connected out and spoke with other graduate workers in the University of Maine, people that are research assistants, teaching assistants, or graduate assistants, meaning they work in an office. They might staff the Collins Center for the Arts, for example, and that's how they get a stipend. That's how their tuition is covered. And everybody had all sorts of issues that have never been addressed, ranging from probably the most common one, very low pay, essentially stipends not covering the cost of living. And that's true for myself. I make below living wage pretty much all graduate workers, the University of Maine here, and especially in Portland, where it's more expensive, make far less than a living wage. Meaning we have to cut lots of corners. We have to essentially live month to month. I live month to month on my paycheck. We have to share apartments and houses, even if that isn't the best thing for us because we can't afford to have a single bedroom, and notwithstanding housing issues in Orono and other parts of Maine. You know, I do research and I also sometimes am a teaching assistant, and right now I supervise 8 undergraduate workers that work for me. They all get paid more than me. The minimum wage for them amounts to more than what a graduate student gets in their stipend, because we are technically working 20 hours a week, when in reality, we're working full-time, if not more than full-time jobs. And we keep the university afloat by doing a lot of the fundamental research, by teaching a lot of courses, and by staffing a lot of offices. There are other issues. Health insurance is a big one. We're the only land grant institution in New England that doesn't get full healthcare coverage as graduate students. And we don't get any dental or vision. We have to opt in to these kind of private premiums. That's not provided with the rest of our package. Some graduate students don't even know that those are options. They're not communicated well. You know, I drive a university vehicle around for work, so I need classes to do that, but I have to, you know, pay separately for my vision insurance. And many of us are families. There are graduate students who are parents, have kids, and it's hard to do all of that and also raise a family with those kinds of conditions. So I speak as someone that lives in Orono and is an active member of the Orono community. There are many more like us, as you know. There are hundreds of graduate students here that live in Orono that are, you know, actively using the various resources in Orono and attending events and shopping at the different shops and going to restaurants and going to the bars. And we like it here. There's a reason we came here, and it's not just because, you know, we got an offer to do a master's or a PhD, but because it attracted us and we are happy being a part of this community. And so that's kind of the background as to why we're unionizing, because we're essentially the only major body of workers at the University of Maine system that do not have a union. Faculty do, staff do, postdocs do, but graduate students who receive pay do not, even though we make up one of the largest bodies of workers in the University of Maine system. And the university would not be what it is without all the things that we do. And we have no like actual voice to vouch for ourselves in these various conditions. I also want to say we're not the first like ones to do this. This is, you know, kind of a widespread chronic issue in academic institutions, with graduate workers always kind of receiving the bare minimum and being told you just got to tough it out for a few years and then you'll get a nice job and it'll make up for it. But it's not sustainable. The job market just becomes more and more competitive. Even if you have an advanced degree, that doesn't necessarily mean toughing it out for 2 years is going to get you to a place of stability. I have a master's already, but I'm back at school again because I, you know, experienced that myself. And so a lot of institutions have been trying to unionize and have been unionizing and have been negotiating contracts with their institutions for better working conditions. And so we're following in that pattern of many other institutions, including various ones in New England that have formed unions and resulted in various, you know, better conditions for their graduate students. So that's the background, and that's kind of why we're doing this. Right now, as we're speaking, we actually have there's a really big meeting taking place between a bunch of organizers in the University of Maine Graduate Workers Union and pretty much the entire administration. It's a 3-hour-long meeting to discuss where everybody is and where we move forward. And we're hoping that we have a very good positive outcome of that meeting towards being recognized and getting down to a bargaining table to negotiate a contract. But, you know, the more support that we have from various allies and groups, and especially in this community, I think will help everybody with this process forward, so we can all kind of cooperate and make things better, not just for graduate students, but the people that are being taught by graduate students and the faculty that have these large labs of students that can't pay for their toothaches. And we have various lines of support already in the forms of, you know, official letters of endorsement. The faculty union at UMaine has unanimously written a formal letter of support, which was sent to the administration. We have an official resolution from the legislature in the state of Maine, where over 70 senators and representatives signed on to that letter, and that was sent to the administration. And we have various other individual letters of support, including a long list of faculty, staff, and postdocs that are in support of our efforts and encouraging the university to voluntarily recognize our union, because we've already kind of demonstrated we have a majority of support via union cards, which we've been signing over the last 2-3 months. And that's what we would hope the town of Orono would support us with as well. And I'll take any questions if anybody have.
Yeah, and we can have this conversation any way that council wants, but what I thought we might do, since Harrison's here, is see if Harrison has any questions, and any information you can share with us about the union process, and then we can have a discussion about the council process. Yeah. So, questions?
Can you, I guess, go
No, I
ahead.
was gonna say, thanks for coming and explaining where you're at and updating. Appreciate it.
Do you want to, I'm curious, so my understanding is that sort of voluntary recognition in the case of graduate workers is actually a little bit different and a little bit more important than it would be for some other classes of workers in the state of Maine. Can you speak to that? Why
Yeah,
is that important to?
That's a
you
good
and other
question.
organizers?
we have a lot of turnover, obviously. As graduate students, people graduate, they go on to their careers and next stages of life. And that pretty much happens every semester and especially every academic year. And so we've put in about a year's worth of work, more than a year's worth of work, just figuring out who all the graduate workers are, where they are, how many there are. None of that information is readily available, by the university itself. And we've been talking to those folks. We've been, having conversations with hundreds and hundreds of people, and we've signed about, if not just over 600 union cards, which is well over what we think is a majority for the entire UMaine system. That includes Portland, University of Southern Maine. And if the university chooses to not voluntarily recognize us via a card check with the Maine State Labor Board, then that kind of forces us to have an election, which would be quite difficult to essentially organize at this stage at the end of the semester. It's hard to get high turnout for elections, and we've already demonstrated we have a large majority of graduate workers that support this. And so voluntary recognition would essentially allow us to start to get to bargaining, to solving these problems as soon as possible, as opposed to delaying it a summer, if not a whole entire, additional semester into the fall, where we have a whole new group of people that have entered the workforce and a bunch of people that have left the workforce. And that could just make things more challenging. And universities sometimes will take that tactic if they're not going to support a graduate worker union because they know it is to the advantage of the university if they don't want their workers to unionize, to try to encourage turnover and low voter turnout to wreck the process of organizing. So
but the cards are now in front of the Maine Labor Board.
no, they're not, because the university, that's what this meeting is about. We're trying to get the university to agree to a card check, which they haven't said yet. They have been kind of vague and have been showing positive signs, but they haven't stated that they will kind of cooperate with the card check process to voluntary recognition. So the cards are with us. We're essentially just waiting for the okay to do that. But we can't just send them to the labor board and then have the labor board decide for us, because it doesn't work like that in Maine.
I guess not to get into too many details, but it seems like it does. You're probably aware that we've gone through this recently.
So it goes for municipal workers,
Different.
but not for graduate workers. They're
Yeah.
not part of the law that was passed in Maine that simplified the process for municipal workers. So there's an additional hoop on the graduate students.
That-
Sorry, I'm insinuating
No,
information.
That's
I'm on the
fine.
Board of Labor Education. I know things. Carry on.
That's good. That's useful. Say.
And so the process has been ongoing, continues to be ongoing.
Yeah,
Um,
we had a, even though we've been working on this for well over a year, we had a rally and made a public launch, maybe 2 months ago now. And we've been reaching out and in communication with the university and the administration to try to get to this point where they will agree to voluntary recognition through a card check. But it's been almost 2 months without them agreeing to that process. And hopefully that's what comes out of this meeting tonight. But we've been, obtaining letters of support from all of these different bodies in the state of Maine to try to encourage the university to follow that path, because they haven't given an, really strong indication that they will yet.
Great. Any other questions or comments about the substance of the matter?
Well, I don't know, Jeff, maybe you can cut it off if it's not in the substance section, but I just also wanted to know if Harrison had anything to say. I think we will talk about our own policy, which asks things about, is there potential opposition to this resolution, right? Is that anything Has there been much opposition so far?
From,
I don't know, it doesn't specify, just any.
yeah. Not really to my knowledge. I mean, the vast majority of the actual workers, the people that would be unionized that we've spoken to are overwhelmingly supportive. There's no massive or even small opposition group of graduate students or faculty or staff to my knowledge. We haven't encountered that. Of course, there's, every now and then one person who is on the fence or doesn't really know what it means, or especially international students, sometimes they're a little confused about what a unionization means. But yeah, I wouldn't say there's any indication of an opposition right now.
I'm good. I don't have any questions or comments for you.
Okay.
Thank you, Harrison.
I have one more, which is just, I think we'll also talk about, in our policy, it talks about draft language for a resolution. So from your email, it seemed pretty clear to me that you're asking for some language that would ask the university to voluntarily recognize the graduate student union based on a card count done by the Labor Relations Board.
Right.
Is that correct? Did I miss?
That's part
language?
one.
Okay.
And we have this exact language, and it might change depending on how this meeting goes. The other part is also encouraging, the university essentially to a fair and expeditious process of negotiating a contract. Because sometimes that gets dragged out for a very, very long time and it doesn't, and sometimes it's not fair with other academic institutions and graduate worker unions. So we would like it to be kind of a very cooperative effort where we're both meeting each other at the table. And so that's essentially the language that we're encouraging.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks. You're right. Okay, so in front of us is the determination about whether, I mean, this is clearly an unprecedented action on the part of council. If council determines that it's that we want to weigh in on this into the internal function of another entity, right? We have to do it through the resolution process, through the resolve process, because it's not in our normal sort of path of communication, right? So I think we need to have that discussion about whether it is appropriate, if we determine that it is appropriate, how we proceed in the next step. So maybe that's where we need to start. And I'll state right off that I've been a underpaid graduate student. I'm sympathetic to it. I'm also cautious about wading into a discussion where we may not have, we've never gone there before. Like the town has never gone there before. We've never, and we wouldn't look at a private company, I don't think, and go there. So while I want to be, if council determines to go forward with this, I want us to be very clear about what kind of statement council would want to draft and be really kind of specific with that language. Because I think if we go forward into uncharted territory with a statement that is not well crafted, I think we're potentially, making a partnership that town staff has worked really hard to cultivate. We could risk some of the benefits of that partnership that we worked on. And that's not anything against what the graduate students are doing, is that wearing the hat of the town as a big entity, it just makes me nervous. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I guess I'd kind of echo that. I think weighing in, one, I think it has to, one of the things is that the direct manner in which it impacts the town of Orono. I think at the end of the day, our role here is the town of Orono operations. And I'm really hesitant to dip into making a statement towards another governing body's role. But probably a bigger concern is that we've gone through this now the past 6 to 8 weeks, whatever it's been going on here. We've heard from our attorney that we should not be weighing in for or against in an attempt to influence the town of Orono. I don't see how we make any statement for this without putting ourselves at risk of coming out in one way or another for internal issues. And I just think it's not, I don't think it's our role to be very, I appreciate all of the conditions you've outlaid. They don't sound good. But I do think we have a role, and I'm really hesitant to get involved with the university's business. And again, knowing that we just went through this and we've been advised about how we should conduct ourselves for the internal. We can't do one. I mean, we are absolutely we'd be coming out in support of a union, which we've been advised not to do. So I think that's problematic for us.
So I think that the problem that you're speaking to was specific to the fact that it's the town of Orono's employees that we would be weighing in on and unduly influencing. I don't think it's the same conflict, or it's not a conflict of interest, but whatever the word is, for weighing in on a major employer within town. And I appreciate the caution that you both have, and I appreciate the reasons for it. I mean, we're speaking on behalf of our town, its people, but many of our townspeople, many of our constituents are these graduate students. And I think speaking out in the interest of our constituents is very important. And I would appreciate your caution if this was a major corporate employer as well, but I don't think that changes the situation. In fact, I would still be for us coming out in support of our constituents in that forum as well. But I don't think, and I'm open to hearing from lawyers about it otherwise, but I don't think that this has the same kind of conflict that the previous unionization effort that we were advised not to discuss had.
Yeah, I see it as fairly low risk, honestly, on our part. I mean, and I don't think that it needs to be as formal as a proclamation or resolution. We also have the ability here to draft a statement. It could be as simple as a letter of support that, signals that we have heard from our constituents and are supportive of them. And I would feel comfortable with that approach. I consider it unlikely that the university would come back and be mad at us for writing a letter of support. It's not as if we actually have that much power and influence over them. We're kind of being all cautious and afraid about something that I don't think is really very likely to come back and bite us. It's possible that a couple of university administrators will be annoyed or will roll their eyes a little bit. And it's possible that they feel that way about the 70, state legislators and representatives who have already signed on, and all of the other letters of support that you've received from, other area political and civic entities. But I mean, a letter of support, like how controversial is that really? Sure.
I guess I would just reiterate the fact again that we're not the first ones to go about this. We're actually kind of one of the later bodies of graduate workers to form a union in New England, especially, where most institutions are either already have contracts or have already had a successful unionization effort and are in the process of forming contracts. And Orono and the University of Maine will not really look that great to potential to candidate graduate students that want to come here, to want to invest time and the limited income they have in this town, knowing that either we don't have some of the same benefits and protections that some of these other institutions and land grant institutions have, and that we don't have solidarity with the town that we live in. Many of us have to go to food pantries on campus because we don't have enough money to actually get groceries. And there are faculty advisors that actually suggest this to their students because they know their students are not being paid much and they can't do much about it. That's just one tiny little tidbit, one little anecdote of how poor some of the conditions are for some people. And that's not just a university issue. This is a town issue when your constituents who are working in reality 40 to 60 hours a week have to go to a food pantry to survive. Can't go to the dentist and can't go, get eyeglasses because those things are not provided by their employer. So I think if you look at it the other way, it would be a greater risk from that kind of perspective, much larger perspective, to not have a positive relationship and solidarity with the hundreds of Orono residents that are graduate students at the University of Maine and the town that they belong to try to find a better path forward for this entire institution.
When you look at the real adversarial relationship that, say what's going on at Rutgers University right now, and then I look at your description of the conversation that the UMaine administration is having right now with the Graduate Students Union. Maybe I'm misreading it and it's surely subjective, but it seems like you are hopeful you will have a better partner with the university.
So far, it seems that way. And in an hour or two, we're going to know whether or not it is that way. We don't have many indications besides just the amount of time it's taken to have a real conversation with them about voluntary recognition that they are trying to squash this effort. And in fact, much of the language in the interactions that we have had with the chancellor and one of I think their lead person that works with all the other unions, the University of Maine, is that, they don't want us to, engage in any kind of fight, that they want a smooth process forward and they respect, unionization and the right to unionize. Those are their words.
Okay.
They're just careful to, put in writing that they are going to voluntarily recognize via card check. But that could change in an hour or two.
So as far as general assistance, I think that is a town operations thing, right? That we do have general assistance. So I guess that's more where I see our purview. If we have graduate students that are coming, they should know that we have general assistance if needed, and they should be leveraging that. I'm still not comfortable with getting in a contract, getting in negotiations or getting into University of Maine administrations. It sounds like it's being they're working with you to whatever extent. I really feel it would be an overstep of Orono Town Council to be weighing in on this issue. That does not sound like a good situation for sure, and you have my sympathy if that's what is happening, but I still don't see where that is our purview personally.
I know we had a difference of opinion when I brought up I think it ended up being a resolution or a letter of support for that bit of federal legislation for some Wabanaki sovereignty issues. And I know that you were against that on similar grounds. So I appreciate where you're coming from. I do respectfully disagree. And I think that our job is to do more than just oversee operations, but to speak the values and take care of our constituents in ways like this. I do think that this is appropriate, but I understand why you feel otherwise.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think, back then that you feel like we were put in for our values. And again, I agree, our values as it pertains to our job. I don't think so. We were put in for that's our job, I think, is overseeing town operations.
I think that's one part of our job. I think we have right in our policies and procedural policy and procedures manual guidelines for issuing proclamations and resolutions. And perhaps you disagree with the existence of that there. Maybe you don't.
You may be right.
But it's there. And many other counselors, I think, in past and present, feel similarly that it's appropriate that it's there. So I think it's part of our job.
Sarah, yeah, I'm curious where you are on this.
Could I ask something about this? I'm looking at our policy and procedure page here, and it does ask us to take a look at what the direct connection would be to Orono's municipal vision. So that's bigger than our day-to-day operations, our values, which is also bigger than our day-to-day operations, and then our policies and operations. So it's asking us to do both. I do feel like we at least have to have that discussion about that at all those levels. I've heard some discussion about, I guess I want to make explicit maybe what values it might connect to, because I haven't heard us do that yet. I guess I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, well, we have done a big process around our DEIB committee that's come into place that council's been involved in for 3 years, and staff has done a ton of work, which I think has talked a lot about equity and inclusion and belonging for everyone in town. So it seems to me that some of those equity issues are connected to this about having a living wage being sort of a basic line thing for folks in our town. Have we had other discussions around living wage for our own employees over time as a council? I wonder if Sophie could speak to that, or just, is that something we've talked about at all ever? What's the history with that?
I mean, we have, in my experience on council, we've looked at what other towns are doing in terms of wage equity, and we've tried to kind of calibrate town compensation to be, a fair market and what's going to attract talent. And so that's certainly been part of the conversations in my experience.
I'm just curious. I wasn't here.
Go ahead.
I was gonna just say, yes, I think the conversations that we've had have been around maintaining a competitive, I wouldn't even say advantage. How about just being able
Enough.
to maintain? We are in the middle of a 3-year wage adjustment plan that will bring us to what we probably should have been paying 2 years ago. So the answer to that is, yeah, sure.
So that is a value and something we've been living into. Okay, that's helpful. I was also, well, did you have something first? Go ahead.
No, I wanted to make sure that we save some time to invite Dan.
Yeah.
No, we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Go, Dan.
Dan, did you have anything you wanted to share?
No, thank you. I'm sorry to be late. I had a meeting that just couldn't
Well, good.
move.
Glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Totally fine, totally fine. And I also wanted to ask, I know that I've been at some meetings where other folks have come forward with proclamations, and I think some of those didn't really have anything directly to do with day-to-day operations or procedures. I think I remember one about healthcare in the state, and maybe someone could speak to a little bit of the precedent of other statements or letters of support or resolutions or whatever we're calling them that we've made.
So
I don't have that history as well as other people here.
When you're
I'm
talking,
happy to-
I can.
Huh?
I can say my experience is really limited. The only one that I've worked on directly was the land acknowledgement statement. And I felt that was within the purview of the town, not only because of the population of our residents and neighbors who are members of the Penobscot Nation, but also because of just the reality of the land we live on. So for me, there was that concreteness to it. But I know that there have been other resolves and other kinds of proclamations made by the town that probably don't have that concrete type.
So if I could give the benefit of a little bit of history, I think the other thing about the land acknowledgement is if you look in the action statement within that, which we have that many don't have, but that it directs staff and council to do certain things around the river and things like that. So we went for many, many years without guidelines on what to do. And we would perennially get people who would come in and want us to divest of fossil fuels, like tell Maine PERS to divest of fossil fuels when Maine PERS is governed by an entirely different group. Sometimes it would just be what we were starting to see it where people just hitting the mass email list to whoever would kind of bite on to whatever issue it was. What we found is that it was starting to take a lot of time. When we think about letters of support that are generated from staff or signed by staff or the council chair are kind of more informal things that, quite frankly, when we did the letter of support for the federal legislation, we probably should have done it as a resolve, much like we did when the council resolved its support for the library foundation, when we then wrote a letter. Under the ordinance, formal council action is really only supposed to happen through ordinance, order, and resolve. So it's a technical piece which we resolve, support, and then sign a letter. So I think part of what this proclamation guidance was trying to do was to get everybody on the same page, stop the extraneous things coming in. It has to be presented by a town, a member of the community, or have the support of a counselor in order to make it into the pipeline. I think the other thing is that people were saying, let's resolve, and then it would all just land on staff's desk to stop everything to write a resolution. So I think part of this was trying to get away from that. And I think the other piece is when one person or one group comes in, it sounds like a great idea. And I think one of the things that these guidelines were trying to do is to make sure that council was thinking broadly about the impact of their words, which is why I think they wanted it to meet at least twice to talk about this publicly on an agenda, and really asking people to kind of look at what is the unintended consequence that might happen by using our voice. Does that kind of make sense? And the other piece this most definitely was a response to was, I remember very clearly walking Scoot Point on a Saturday afternoon, getting an email from somebody who wanted to pass a resolution the following Monday. And this was kind of like, there's got to be a setup. And if council's going to use its voice, it needs to have public deliberation about doing that.
And so like the one that came forward about the health, I can't remember the exact thing. Did that never there was not a resolve by council about
Yeah,
that?
so
Was there
it,
for any of those ones?
no, it came to council for a discussion and council opted not to move forward with it. I think the verbiage was really something, and you're testing my memory, but that many people on the town council felt very strongly that it was important to take a stand, but that they should use their personal voices to articulate that stand, that it was not a municipal matter.
So we've heard from all counselors present. We don't approve actions in committee, but our next step, it would seem, would be that since there is a group of people who, if I'm reading everybody right, would like to move forward. Yes, yes.
I think Rob and I certainly, Sarah, do you
Yeah.
want to weigh in? You asked some
I
questions.
am not entirely sure yet. I'll be really
Yeah.
honest. I'm not entirely sure where I'm at on this one.
Well, I'm still cautious. I still have my reservations. I'm not sold yet. It's not that I'm not sold on the union, because I am. Because, you know, I support that. I'm not sold that it is the town's job to have that, you know, have that voice or whatever with the university.
I wonder, Harrison, well, so what would be our timeline if we, as a council, do move this forward for consideration and potential vote at an upcoming meeting? What would be the realistic timeline for hypothetically approving or not approving a letter of support for the grad union?
When is the next meeting?
May 8th, I believe. Is that
So-
correct, Sophie? I
Mhm.
believe it's May 8th.
So we would have to,
May 8th is officially the first day of the summer term, I believe, at the University of Maine. I don't know if it's the same at the University of Southern Maine. And that is also when probably many graduate workers' contracts officially end. So in an ideal world, we would love to have the card check and the recognition process occur before then. And that's what this meeting right now is about. Any support that we can, additional support that we can obtain before then, in the next week, in the next 2 weeks, is I think our timeline.
So
It's not like we don't want support after that. But that's,
might it be more helpful to you then to have, if like a counselor, I would volunteer myself for this, drafted a letter of support, and any other counselor who wanted to sign it could sign it, and it could come from some members of the town council while not being an official town proclamation.
Is that? So do we act as council when we're not?
I don't think that we're acting as council. We are individuals who happen to be members of the town council.
So
And we,
is there a council member, like your name and council member? Is that how that's done?
I mean, I think that, I
At
think
that
we
point,
need
are
to
you
make,
speaking as the council?
I
if
think
you
we need
are-
to make plain in the letter that we're, this isn't a formal, issuance of the town of Orono. However, we, the duly elected, these duly elected people speaking, as individual members of this town and public officials. Do hereby believe.
I-
So
I
We
think
can't
that-
take a vote before May 8th. I mean, there's no way for us to do that, correct, in our system. So like that isn't, is that correct? We have no
We could have
ability to
special
vote,
meetings.
right?
I don't know if we
mean,
want
yeah.
to.
Have
Well,
a special meeting next
So
Monday.
that, right, so
I
that's.
don't know what your schedule for going forward with things like this is,
I
but that's
think-
why I reached out
Yeah.
several
so-
weeks ago
Yeah.
with the same timeline in mind.
Yeah,
on
so
our-
I think for us, the proposed, if we were going to take council action on this, we would probably want some draft language at our next committee meeting, which is before May 8th. And then if that language is acceptable, it would go into a committee meeting agenda for a vote. That next scheduled committee meeting is May 8th. I suppose we could, it's always possible to call an emergency committee meeting. To get back to Sonia's point, I'm not sure any kind of collaborative letter or email that involves more than two counselors is kosher. I'm not sure. I don't think it is.
So
when the legislature did one.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sophie. It could be very
Legislature
different.
did an official letter,
Oh,
over 70 elected officials that signed on,
But not the whole legislature.
not the whole unanimously.
So
but-
the legislature works by very different rules. They can
Yeah.
have a committee and caucus and 8 people can go into a room that you never know what's happening. They can make policy that impacts us in the future. And we have no idea what the negotiation was to get there. So the legislature and the town are definitely held to two very different bars. I want to make it really clear, I'm not weighing in on this topic. It is not a staff issue. I will say that the idea that a group of council speaks for council is kind of antithetical to the idea that council acts as a single body with a majority of its voices creating the voice of council. So 4 votes on this council creates the voice of council. So I am not a legal scholar, but I would just say that is something we have most definitely avoided. And in the past, when counselors have signed things of a political nature, it has really caused heartburn in the community, and council has heard about that.
So is it possible, I don't know, this is just a question because I hear Sonia saying she's willing to draft some language and I'm not entirely clear, but when I was listening to Leo and then I was listening to Rob and I'm listening to both sides and I'm thinking, okay. And Sonia says, maybe there's a letter we write that doesn't come out as strongly, maybe that's something in between is sort of what I heard. Maybe that's not what you meant.
or
but-
it's not from the council,
Right,
like,
well, that I heard later, but I'm talking
Okay.
earlier when people were saying like, maybe we don't make a resolution, we write a letter of support and that's not as confrontational. And I guess I'm curious to see what the not as confrontational language would look like. That's maybe something more in between that maybe we can agree that we're comfortable signing just to say that we have constituents that have been reaching out to us that, folks in our community are really impacted by the wage issues and that we're concerned about it. And we hope that they're taking it very seriously and really doing their best to do that effort. I don't know what that language would be like, but I'm curious, is there something in between? Because it does seem like we're a pretty divided council on this. And so I'm a little bit curious if there's an in-between place. And if you're then later said you'd be willing to think about language, I'm wondering, would you be willing to think about language that you think might address the needs that have been expressed here? That's just a question.
I think if we want to explore that, I think it's great. I do think it has to fit within the format of a resolve. I don't think we
Right.
can do anything like at a lower standard than that. So the opportunity to kind of work out that language would be if a counselor were willing to do some draft language and bring it to our next committee meeting, then we can look at that hopefully with, clear eyes and everybody present then we look at that language and then we determine whether that is language that the council wants to go forward with. At which point it either shows up on our next scheduled meeting, which I know may be late for you, or if there is, we go through the process of calling a special meeting. That would be the sort of procedural way to go about it. We would need to have a counselor willing to draft some of that language.
I would be happy to. How about for our next committee meeting, I will draft and circulate 2 versions of a letter, one that includes kind of some of the template language that Harrison had originally suggested, and another that is a little bit of a more generalized statement in support of wage equity, and that we hear and care about the voice of our constituents, and we can consider those 2 or something in between.
Can we, so it has to fit within this format, right? That's, so the content is our job, the format is staff's job.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to, okay, so could you, maybe by the end of the week, communicate that language with Sophie? Then we'll have it in time for our next meeting.
Reasonable stuff. I did have one more question, Sophie, which was just, maybe you can speak to this, so I'm gonna ask it and you're gonna say if it's like not something that can be spoken about, but is there something we know about our own unionization process right now related to Leo's concern about whether we're not supposed to speak when we're having our own unionization? Is there any chance that our own unionization thing is resolved soon? Is there any date by which there's a labor board's hearing scheduled or anything like that right now that we know of?
We're in negotiation, going back and forth about very tack things, quite.
Okay.
But
But no date that we know right now.
there is no date.
Thank you. Just thought it'd be helpful to know.
Sonia, the thing that would be helpful is short, almost talking points that I could turn into whereas statements and then therefore. And you can put as many things under the therefore as you want, but it's hard to take a beautifully flowing, well-crafted letter and turn it into a resolve. Or we could resolve to a letter if we do, but let's see what you come up with.
Great.
And if I could have that by Thursday,
Sure.
then it could, I could go through the proper channel to get the agenda.
Great. Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Jeff, could just for a second, Harrison, I know you and I have been in touch by email, and I'd be happy to see if we could find time to talk since I missed your presentation today, and I apologize for that. It just couldn't be helped. But I'd be happy to connect with you and talk with you. If that's
Sure.
something you want to try and do. So
Yeah,
you have
we can find
from
it.
me in your box. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Any other discussion on this matter? Thank you, Harrison. I appreciate your
Thank you
time.
very
Thanks
much.
for taking the time to come in.
Change, go back and
And we'll get an update about what happens tonight if it's all resolved and over.
Yeah.
I'll let you know as soon as I know.
Yeah, hopefully
Thank
it's
you.
much ado about nothing.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Next item, comp plan, yes.
Reading.
Oh, Comp plan implementation committee, initial discussion of comp plan recommendation to increase density in the commercial 2 zoning district. This is Kyle.
Everyone.
Okay.
So a pretty short proposed amendment. This is similar to when we amended the minimum lot size in the medium density residential district not too long ago. The comprehensive plan made a recommendation for the commercial 2 district, which for anyone who might not be perfectly aware, the commercial 2 district is primarily the district along Park Street. There are a few pockets around town of commercially 2 zone properties. Think on Main Street where Ledbetter's and Van Sickle is, and then that kind of intersection of Forest and Essex in the middle of the agriculture district. The commercial 2, I think, has kind of historically been used where there were some existing small scale commercial uses. and they were in residential areas for the most part. They kind of rezone those as commercial too. But the primary area that we're talking about is that Park Street corridor. And the whole intent of that district is primarily that it's supposed to be a mixed use district. That means residential and usually smaller scale commercial are allowed together. It's not like the MDR or HDR. It's similar to the downtown in that a whole bunch of different types of uses are allowed, just at a slightly, a less dense scale than the downtown. The goal isn't to, necessarily make Park Street into a second downtown, but bring some of that kind of corridor walkable feel. So the comp plan makes a specific recommendation in there to adjust the minimum lot size for the C2 district. Currently, it's 40,000 square feet minimum lot size on lots with public water and sewer, which is, just it's not conducive to a walkable, compact zoning district at all. I mean, that's an acre almost. So I mean, when you have really like one use every acre, that doesn't create a very walkable environment. So the comp plan kind of recognized that, those sorts of lot sizes are more typically what we find in our C1 and EEZ districts, where you're expected to have more, larger scale commercial, industrial, even manufacturing, those types of things. And you might need those larger lot sizes. So the recommendation was to bring that down to 20,000 square feet. In 2016, there was sort of a bigger scale ordinance amendment at the time. And part of that ordinance amendment actually implemented a minimum lot. You'll see on here, it's called minimum lot per family, but you can think of that as minimum lot area per dwelling unit. So an amendment was made in 2016 that put a minimum lot per dwelling of 15,000 square feet in the C2. So that means you still needed the 40,000 square feet to create a lot in the C2, but you use that 15,000 square feet to basically determine how many units you can put on that 40,000 square foot lot. So let's say you have a 45,000 square foot lot, you could put a commercial space and 3 units on it. But it doesn't really get at totally at the issue of kind of creating that more, dense walkable corridor. You're still only allowing really like one structure for every acre of land. Things become more spread out, and it doesn't have that kind of close-knit walkable feel. So that's where the 20,000 square feet came in. And what we're recommending here. So this shows that whether it's public water and sewer, you have public water and on-lot septic, or a well and public sewer, or you have on-lot both sewer and water. It would just be 20,000 square feet for each type. And really, there aren't any areas in the C2 that aren't on public water and sewer, except for down by Silvers, kind of all the way down that way. There aren't too many C2 areas where you would find that. And then the minimum lot area per family for those off-lot or those on-lot sewer and water would also be reduced to 20,000. And the goal there would just be to make it a little more flexible for some of those lots in that corridor. So you have a number of lots that are between 20,000 and 40,000 that would all of a sudden become conforming lots that are currently legally non-conforming. So they can continue to exist, but it can oftentimes be difficult to expand on there. There's a number of lots on Park Street that are in that 40 to 80,000 range square feet. So let's say, you have a 50,000 square foot lot. Right now on Park Street, you can't divide that lot at all. Like if someone wanted to redevelop there or, carve a portion off of their lot and create a new lot with a new structure, you wouldn't be able to do that because you don't have enough land. Bringing it down to 20 would offer some amount of flexibility to do things like that, where if you had even a 40,000 square foot lot now, you could potentially, if you had the way the lot was situated, you had the room, you'd be able to divide it and create a new legal lot with, a new, commercial unit and, apartment or something like that, some mixed use kind of structure on there. So it does offer some flexibility, and I think it's a fairly simple way to accomplish what the comp plan was getting at.
I was just gonna
was-
say,
I was gonna get to the but.
oh, all right. Okay, I was gonna,
I would say that I think there's a theme in some of the recommendations in the comp plan that they recognize really important intents and goals, and those goals are still things that we're struggling with now. The whole point here was to open up more commercial space, more residential space in a part of town that's really close to the university. It's close to the downtown. It's an important area for the town to grow going forward. Like if we're going to grow, that spot makes sense. I don't think a change down to a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size is really that significant. I think at the time, it was noted as something to work towards, and I think it was probably an incremental change. And it was, okay, let's see how this goes. Let's see how it addresses things, and then go from there. I don't think there are a ton of opportunities on Park Street or the couple other commercial 2-zoned areas where you're going to see just major development or, lots of new housing or lots of new commercial spaces going in, or, kind of just recreating the whole feel of the corridor just because this minimum lot size was dropped to 20,000. I think when we look at our next comp plan, this still has to be a key area that we focus on. When you look at some of the minimum lot sizes in other districts that we have, right, the MDR is a 15,000 square foot minimum lot size. The HDR, our high density residential, is a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size with 5,000 square foot per dwelling. So, like in that district, for instance, you would be able to have a 2-family home on a 10,000 square foot lot. Our downtown is a 2,000 square foot minimum lot size. So, right, there's a lot of room to add density and potential to build that kind of walkable neighborhood and get that feel before you get all the way down to the density of what the downtown is. A 20,000 square foot lot still isn't going to get you to a walkable feel. It's just not, especially with a 15,000 square foot per dwelling lot. I mean, you're almost at half an acre and you can have one commercial business and one apartment, and maybe if that size lot, you had commercial on the first floor and 2 to 4 apartments on, a second and third floor above it. And you have that on, kind of multiple lots, you start to build off that. I think it's important to recognize when we look at some of these changes that just because we're reducing the minimum lot size, people shouldn't expect that all of a sudden tomorrow that it's going to spark all this, new development and the problem is solved. I think it's an incremental change in the right direction, but I think it's still something that we would want to look at for sure going forward.
so I think it's safe to say that in the absence of the comp plan, if staff could just make recommendations, we would clearly be coming to you with a recommendation that we drop the density or the minimum lot size even further.
Yeah.
What we do know is that although that makes great planning sense and aligns with our current vision, when the comp plan was adopted, they didn't just say evaluate and create a better density or more dense C2 district. They put actual numbers in. And I don't know if folks were following council when we were talking about dropping the minimum lot size in the medium density residential zone, but we had a counselor or two at that point that really wanted to get much smaller. And we went out and got a legal opinion that was pretty black and white, that said you cannot go more dense or smaller than what the comp plan number is. Council just does not have that authority. You've got to go back through, amend the comp plan in order to be able to do that. So if you were to say, Kyle, you are right, it should be 10,000 square feet, we would end up with an ordinance that could be challenged and we would lose in court. I do think, so one of the things that we thought about is, does it make sense to come forward with this particular change when in a couple of years we're going to be right back here with probably a different group of people in terms of the comp plan committee talking about why walkability in the C2 is really important. And I come down to this idea of the incremental change is important, and going from 40 to 15 or 40 to 10 is, I think, really hard for people to visualize, and it's a huge jump. Whereas moving from 20 and a change from there might be a little bit easier to get to that place that we think council should be at least considering for walkability in the C2.
What do you mean? Can you expand like on walkability? I understand the term, I guess.
So it's
So trying to figure out how that plays into a 20,000 or 15,000 square foot lot, but that.
right. So when you have, so walkability is based on a bunch of things, you know, the fact that it's a mixed use district is one of those things, because you can live and go to, you know, jobs or goods and services all in the same area. So a mixed use zoning district is always going to be inherently more, you know, walkable than a single use district where you have residential and then you have commercial and you have to walk.
C2 is already mixed use.
Yeah, C2 is already mixed use. So, and it's pretty flexible when you look at bigger lots, right? Because we have things like our cluster development, right? So cluster development, all of the, you know, any lot above 3 acres is eligible for cluster development. So that, you know, things like the Ave and a reserve and, you know, those sorts of projects can take advantage of higher density allowances because the, you know, it's an incentive approach where you're preserving certain amounts of open space and you get a density allowance. So like, for instance, the cluster development density ends up being more like 1 unit for every 5,000 square feet of lot area, something like that. But the way that
3.5, you said?
3 acres. So, but that doesn't do anything for all of these lots, which are, you know, many of them that are under 3 acres. They have to go by our kind of base zoning standards, which are these here. So the smaller a lot size, just in general, not just the C2, means the closer everything is together. It means you're promoting, you know, it could just be allowing smaller spaces, right? If you only want to build a storefront or a home that's, you know, 1,000 square feet or a couple thousand square feet, whatever it is, you might not need to buy an acre of land. You might be able to fit your storefront with a couple, you know, apartments above it and a small parking area on a much smaller lot, and it becomes more affordable. And then by having smaller lots, you're able to do more of those. And, you know, combined with the design standards we did for Park Street a while back, where we allowed closer setbacks to the road, you're bringing development closer to the road and you have more frequent development. It creates a more walkable feel, because that walkability, you know, score that we sometimes use is based off of the amount of things you can get to in a certain radius. You know, so if you just have one store and then, you know, 100 feet of frontage and empty lot space, and then you have another acre lot and you have one use on that lot, that it spreads everything out when you span across a whole corridor. When you have a bunch of, you know, 5, 10,000 square foot lots, it becomes easier to navigate from a pedestrian. I mean, just imagine, walking downtown on Mill Street versus walking on Park Street right now. I mean, it's a much easier, more pleasant experience. You're going to, more easily be able to hit multiple things in a shorter amount of time.
But we'd be down in the HDR space if we were at 10,000, obviously, right?
Right, but those are two completely different districts. The HDR is purely a residential district. We also, I would say, another area that we would want to look at in the comp plan is the fact that we hardly use the HDR zoning anywhere in town. Pretty much, it's used for some specific residential projects and developments like Dryden or Webster Point or things like that. But we don't have a dedicated area of the town that's HDR zoning, and there's really nothing that, the C2 being a mixed use district and the HDR being a high density residential district are, I'd say they serve different functions, but they're pretty similar probably in how, the feel that you would want to create. You're creating a smaller lot, not so small that you're downtown in, a more urban setting. You still have, you're not going to have your buildings touching and, just consistent uses, but, it's smaller lots that are easily navigable and, not like, whereas the MDR is a little more spread out, and then you get to the LDR, which is, out of our growth area, a lot of it and things like that.
One more quick question, then I'm done, then I'll let someone else ask, but tell me, what's an acre as far as square foot?
43,560.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, so I heard you say, like, that possibly we're gonna need to redo this in a couple of years, and I hear the advantage to doing it now, which is maybe we sort of step it down and it's easier for people to understand and it goes step by step. Is there a disadvantage, however, to doing it now and then changing it in 2 or 3 years? Could you envision that people would build something calculating this lot size and then think, oh, shoot, if I'd known that it was now 15 instead of 20, I could have fit in 3, but I didn't space them out correctly? I mean, I don't know. I just want to know if there's a potential problem by that. So
So the beautiful part of our process is once we start working through a process,
Mhm.
Kyle is on notice. So the people who would come and try to put any development in are going to be talking to Kyle. So
Yeah, we pretty frequently have those conversations where people, just that people might be interested in a large piece of property and they want to start with something smaller scale. And we pretty routinely remind people that if you have some larger scale plan in mind, even if it might not happen, that you probably want some conceptual plan of the bigger picture up front, so you don't kind of ruin your idea.
So you would tell them at that point, this may get even smaller in a couple of years, so they would know that up front. Okay, and my other question is, I'm aware that when the comp plan happened, there was lots of community consultation and meetings and all of that, but that was 2015. And, we're a lot of years now. In the intervening years or back during the comp plan, was there any objection by people who lived in these neighborhoods about this? Or was it pretty much everybody was fine with it?
So I think I'm the only one that sat through that comp plan. I don't remember any objection here. I do, there was some push around cluster developments and reducing density so that we didn't end up with another large scale student housing. I would also just remind people that this conversation is the beginning of a much larger process that has planning board. And I don't know if you saw that Dan has his hands up.
Yes, yep. Councilor DeBear.
Sarah, just, Counselor Marks just asked both of my questions. She's like my spirit animal.
Awesome.
No, but so, I mean, with neighborhood, like neighbors, people who live in their own property or live in this district would be alerted to the fact that a change was potentially being considered.
So for a district this small, they are relatively small. We would probably send out some postcards, especially knowing that it's council's concern.
So, okay. But the process for, if we did this, so I had the same question that Councilor Marks had in terms of, and I'm glad to hear that, if I had a piece of property in this district and I shortchanged myself because, I put stuff up that would have been a different project if the density had been different, if I known the density was going to be different. But in terms of how long, when do you think, in terms of when would the council approve this density change? Is there and I'm sorry if I don't.
So there's a process that, the next thing that would happen is this would have to go to the planning board, which the planning board just met, so that's a month out. The planning board holds a public hearing. Depending on who shows up at the public hearing and what's talked about, public hearing can either be closed the same night or held open if there are questions or concerns that are raised. As soon as the planning board determines that they have heard from the community, they would then make a recommendation to the town council. That could again be all one night or multiple nights, depending on what they hear. That comes back to the town council committee. Committee would then decide whether it was ready to move it forward. It would call a public hearing at one meeting and then hold it at the next. If there's feedback from the community at that meeting, mostly opposition, then council would usually bring it back to committee for more discussion in the open. And then it would go back to a council meeting for adoption. The circuit breaker in there is if, as part of the discussions, there's anything substantive changed, and Kyle and I work together and then oftentimes bring our land use attorney in. If we have questions about that, it might have to go all the way back through the process again. So we have to make sure that the public knows what we're voting on and has ample opportunity to weigh in. But that's an ordinance can't be amended on the floor at a council meeting. It's a straight up or down vote.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. It only relates to the little patch out on Forest in Essex, which I think exists because there used to be a gas station. So since the gas station no longer exists, it would seem like if we had a more clustered development out there, it's sort of like an island that floats.
I don't think there's enough land there to have a clustered development. Those lots are pretty small and non-conforming for the most part, and some of the bigger ones, the way it's zoned is a portion of the property that's developed is in the C2, but the rest of it is in the agriculture district. I don't think changing from 40 to 20 there, or in that case 60 to 20. I don't think that would allow the vision of any lots
So
necessarily, but
he's going to put a Dollar General with an apartment.
well,
Can't put a
I mean, those areas are already zoned to C2. I mean, those sorts of uses, commercial uses are allowed there. If someone proposed,
But only in that tiny little space.
right, so it would, the project, so when I say the use is allowed, the use is allowed from a zoning standpoint. That doesn't mean a project would be feasible. You know, someone would still have to have the access and proper parking and, meet setback requirements and all of those things for something to actually happen there. And whether, so, right, a giant, big box store going in isn't going to fit on a small lot like that, or even a bigger restaurant with a parking area adequate to meet the ordinance requirement. And then some of those lots are pretty wonky in shape, whether they even had the kind of space to make all that work is pretty unclear. But yeah, those areas are technically zoned as C2 now. So if an existing building, someone had some use like that, they would be able to go through the planning board technically to.
Am I correct that we wouldn't want any kind of, we shouldn't use the word cluster, I guess, but any increased density development out there?
So in
Because isn't that
general,
kind of urban sprawl that
Yep.
nobody isn't in favor anymore, or am I?
so in
Like
general, I would
misreading it.
say, yeah, right, in our agriculture, if you zoom out, right, that's all just agriculture. And, that's why, I mean, those uses aren't allowed there in our agriculture district. Minimum lot size is almost 4 acres, you can't do those things there. I think they kept that pocket around that intersection because of the historic use at some of those properties, because it's kind of a meeting point right in the agricultural district for some of the residents who live out there, if someone.
Rental store.
Right, if someone wanted to put a little thing like that, a little restaurant, a little store,
Ice cream shack.
yeah, it gives some space to do it. But yeah, certainly there's not a goal to, in that area, create a whole walkable village or something like that. I think that space was just left for the rare opportunity for an amenity for the residents out there.
So we're here because the next step, if you're in general agreement, would be for Kyle to take this to the planning board for its public hearing and its determination that it's consistent with the comp plan before it would come back here.
I like it. Seems like a good incremental step in the right direction, and appreciate the context about why we're not sort of moving further in that direction, given the legality of where we're at with the process. So, yeah.
I agree. I think it's good to move it forward.
Supportive.
I'm still trying to understand what the purpose is, to be honest, but that's maybe I haven't been paying attention long enough, but like what do we would look to achieve on Park Street out of doing that? If I think about what's there, it mostly is the single family or the developments. I guess I want to be certain that this does not work towards the ability to create another housing development, because I don't think the community wants that. So
These standards are far less dense than what our cluster development allows. So any bigger housing development on a bigger lot would almost assuredly take advantage of our cluster development option and not use these standards at all. Whether the lot size was 40,000 or 20,000, whatever it was, it doesn't come close to the density that cluster development allows.
What is the density? of cluster
Also-
development allowance?
Well, so there's a
Sorry,
unit density, so you can have, it's a little different. It says you can have 8 units per developable acre of land. So you subtract out all the natural areas and the areas that you wouldn't be able to develop on a lot. And then you times that by 8, and that's how you get how many units you can have.
And to put that into perspective, before council made the change right after the comp plan was adopted, it was 16. So that immediately made it not as much of a benefit to have housing, because you couldn't, like a student housing, because you could not get the density to make the money.
So the existing ones were built when it was at 16 and we now have it at 8. And can I just ask one quick clarifying? The cluster development, which I hear you say is totally separate and not connected to this. So what parts of town does the cluster development apply? Is there a zone that applies to, or does that apply everywhere?
So allowed in most zones, MDR, C2, LDR, FNA. The density changes though. It's that when I mentioned that 8 units per acre for the C2, it's not that same number for every, it kind of scales with the district. So
The 8.2 is specifically park, what you're quoting there?
for C2, yeah. So in the MDR, for instance, it's 4 units per acre. I think in the LDR and agriculture district, it's 2 units per acre, maybe. So the density scales with the general feel of the district.
Okay.
But, and I think to your point, Leo, the reason that I think some of those larger housing developments are more popular is because there is no way to generate smaller scale but still dense housing options. the minimum lot requirements are so big that it makes it impossible to develop that, first floor commercial with 2 or 3 apartments above it and make it financially viable for a developer. Like, it's either, we buy a piece of, a large piece of land and create a massive housing complex, or we have a single family home. There's no in between that's really feasible on that district. A lot of those lots with single family homes, not that people couldn't keep them as single family homes or, if they wanted to, but the ordinance right now, not, as part of this change, is pretty clear that it's meant to be a mixed use district. It's not meant to be a single family home district, like something like the MDR or LDR is more leans to. And its location sandwiched kind of in town between the university and the downtown. Like, yeah, I would agree. Right now, it doesn't feel like a very walkable corridor in a lot of areas. There are a lot of larger lots, a lot of single use lots. But I think that's the point, is our current zoning hasn't encouraged that sort of development. It's prohibiting that sort of development. And this change kind of aims at getting there.
What does that do to our downtown when we develop that? Again, I can't envision what the impact this could potentially have at this point. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. But if we were to encourage all of that, and again, if it does encourage the mixed use development up there, what does that do to our downtown? And do we care?
I don't think it does anything necessarily. I think it would open up more space for different businesses to go in. I think it would open up more space for people to live. I don't think it's replicating the feel of the downtown. It's not replicating
Is it taking away from the downtown, from getting people into?
So this is already.
I don't know this. I'm literally asking, as a developer, do we want a vibrant downtown, and do we want to encourage people down there? Or, and if so, does developing up there spread that out, bring less people downtown?
No, I think we would want
completely spitballing here and don't know what I'm talking about, just to.
Yeah, I think we
full
want
disclosure.
both. I think we clearly want a vibrant downtown. We have things like the buyers project and that zone change to allow more housing to go in and bring more people downtown. You have the potential of Tyler employees, coming downtown to businesses, and, we allow all sorts of things downtown. I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of grow the downtown as well. But there needs to be a lot more space. I think not everyone can fit in the downtown. Not everyone wants to be in the downtown. And there should be other parts of town that have that mixed use feel. There should be other parts of town that you can navigate without the use of a car, aside from the downtown. We've invested a lot in the infrastructure on Park Street for walking and biking and transit, to take better use of that and to alleviate some of those traffic concerns on Park Street. That's why all this is in the comp plan in the first place. It was because through that process, they identified that corridor as somewhere that's good for this scale of development. It's in our growth area. We don't want the downtown to be the only area where anyone can develop anything at a reasonable density. I think we allow things like 2-family homes, right? The C2 allows multifamily as a use, which multifamily is 3 units in a structure or more. But you would need 45,000 square feet to have 3 units. That's just not, it's not encouraging that kind of compact feel. And when I say compact, I don't mean, you know, right outside here. I mean, it's just not, it's not conducive to that environment. You know, we're making it very difficult to have those kind of small scale multifamily buildings that offer a middle ground between, you know, okay, maybe someone doesn't want to live in a massive development apartment complex, and maybe someone doesn't want to live in a single family home. They'd like something in between. We don't have a lot of that in between. The C2, along with the downtown, I would say, are the two areas where that could be feasible. And their proximity kind of to all of those town, you know, amenities and services makes those two of the more appealing geographical
And
locations.
there's a lot of demand for people to want to live in some of these areas that are walking distance to campus as well as still walking distance to downtown. It's kind of a sweet spot for anyone who didn't want to have a car or wanted the flexibility to
So
be
I
able
would,
to get around.
I would just add, as the one that is trying to attract people to the community, we don't have a lot of space. So realistically, what this does is help us create some space in places that work with our infrastructure, work with the community. So when you allow, you know, you create these smaller spaces to be able to do that, I think that's important. Because right now, we just don't have, we're not growing any more land. So we have to figure out a way to do that. And the two ways to do that are either infill like this and figure out ways to do it, or expanding different zones in different places and infrastructure. So.
All right, thank you.
So are there any other comments? Dan, okay. So I think consensus is we should go forward.
Oh, yeah, like, I think I'm sure it's come up, but with our Route 2 plans, our construction plans for that, it seems like we'll think about that together as well, right?
Yeah,
That's maybe a question for Sophie. Yeah.
The entire intent of that Route 2 corridor is to kind of bring that village feel in
Right.
this area all the way up Park Street to slow traffic down, to make it more pedestrian friendly, to encourage development. I will also say, while there were many pieces of LD 2003 that were really difficult to envision, the one that I think Kyle and I both hope we can bring into the comp plan is this idea of identifying your high density residential area for growth. I think that's a great idea, because in order to kind of meet some of those affordable housing and other housing goals, we're going to have to think a little bit differently outside the medium density residential, which mixed use gets you there in a way that I think has more benefit than just straight apartment buildings.
I'd love to see, Kyle, if there are pictures of this type of development already done, in other parts of the, state or world, or just, what you think it looks like in terms of, but a visual that way. So, but yeah. But thank you.
Yeah, I do think pictures would help. And Leo, like having lived in lots of college towns, like I feel like when you go to lots of college towns, you see how much more potential there is for a college with the same student population than what we have, just speaking of the student population. And that's different than the issue of, housing, like really needing housing in Orono desperately, which I keep hearing from people everywhere I go. So,
I mean, I think one way to kind of look at it a little bit is, and I think when we were having these discussions during the comp plan process, Brewer is a lovely place. I'm not picking on Brewer, but I think there was a real desire not to have Park Street kind of turn into Wilson, where they had the larger kind of blocked areas that were really hard. The other thing that mixed use does is it helps tie the university closer to downtown.
we're a little unusual that we have the separation we have when you hop around to university towns. Thank you. Appreciate your questions.
All right. All right, moving on to Finance and Operations Committee.
Appreciate it.
Review of Town Council Policies and Procedure Manual. You want to do that? I'll do it.
It's whatever works for you. I'm happy to, but.
Sophie can jump in if I misstate this. One of the things we try to do annually is review the Town Council Policies and Procedures Manual. This year, we thought two small changes were necessary. One is just clarifying our operational procedure that we tend to use Robert's Rules of Order as our operating principle. Although it's certainly in workshop and committee, we don't have to, we're not as formal with that. But just to keep our process flowing smoothly. And the other thing was the addition of the first night of Hanukkah as a religious holiday that the town would try to observe.
So the only thing I would add is that the council's policies and procedures are really about the council. So these two items, one, Jeff suggested just because question had come up as to as a new facilitator of formal council meetings, how do we do it? And I have sheets of Robert's rules for each of you.
That's so
So nice.
Thanks for the swag.
And I'm hoping that when you're done, you'll give them back.
Sure.
Okay.
Town property, got it.
Yep. But so that's why that one came up. And the other one was simply, we usually sit at least once a year and look at the religious holidays to be considered for planning. And we had changed that list, but it didn't also get changed here. I do think from a staff perspective, I look at that manual to help serve the council. So if there are things in that manual that council doesn't like, doesn't want, doesn't whatever, at times it can feel like council's pushing back against staff when I'm using the guidance that you've given me.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's important to sit and look at that and to make whatever changes. And then as a group, to agree that that's what you're going to follow. And if there are questions about what you're going to follow that I can't give you legal or technical feedback on, I can find it for you. But I guess it's easy to say, yeah, it looks great, bang the gavel and move on. But there is a bigger issue.
I've got a whole list of
I do
things.
too,
after
actually.
looking through this stuff. I think it'd be worth a workshop on this.
I just had a question, like, what is our timeline tonight? Because I'm looking at how long this agenda is, and I'm kind of with Rob that I also went through it in a bunch of detail, and I was so pleased that you were bringing it to us. And I have a whole list of other things that I caught that are sometimes just typos, and other times I think maybe are issues where it doesn't exactly match the charter. And I'd love to have a longer discussion than what I'm envisioning possible tonight with the length of this agenda.
So the good, bad news
Yeah.
with the agenda for your planning purposes is that between COVID and bereavement leave and other things, my office has been in shambles. I have I thought I was going to have the budget for you. I found a spreadsheet error that you would not want the budget with that error in it. But it will be ready on Wednesday and I can distribute it. And I thought we could just do a quick overview. My letter is actually quite lengthy, which might give you all the overview you need. Jeff had suggested that we could kind of push that ahead a little bit. Still keeps you within your May 1st of having to have it.
So we're trying to only get through item 5 tonight.
Item 4A, B, which I don't think will take a lot of time because that's more about schedule, and C, I will distribute to you.
On this item that we're talking about, the only thing I came to mind was to add with like chair discretion, like, does this tie us to this? Because tied to Robert's rules, which is how we operate, but I just want to make sure that there is discretion that usually we operate fairly loosely in that.
I think my understanding of how previous councils have used Robert's Rules is that it is the template by which we guide our meetings, but we don't dive into the 300-page rule book. And that was really my intention, right? Like not, I do a lot of meetings, but I don't facilitate a lot of public meetings. And I needed something to help me like outline these things. So
I like the fact that we have Robert's Rules of Order. This is wonderful. I do think though that in our own ordinances, there is a section about how our meetings will be run. And I guess before we would put this in policy, I would want to be sure that somebody had double checked that everything in that section is in compliance with Robert's Rules of Order, because otherwise we've set up a dynamic where one thing is telling us to do one thing and the other is telling us to do the other. So has someone line by line gone through those to match them yet?
So I will tell you, in general, in municipal world, whether there's the town meeting
Right.
manual and how you moderate town meetings. So there's this idea of moderation as opposed to facilitation, which are different. There's what your own process tells you. Robert's rules, I think, is where the council kind of goes down to when we want to amend things, what is the process that we use? I think we really get into that very kind of picky, that's how we determine how we're going to use certain things. I don't think we strictly follow Robert's rules, but I do think when you look at the ordinance, which would have precedent or primacy, and then there are these big swaths of nothing.
Yeah.
That is where Robert's rules would kind of lay in terms of parliamentary procedure. And you notice that Nancy sits next to the council chair during meetings. 100%. Her job is to be the parliamentarian, to make sure that now Jeff or whomever will follow the rules the way they're supposed to be read.
I guess I'm just thinking that what I would want to see in a policy manual would say, in accordance with our ordinances, which is section 229, H through V, because I looked it up.
Yep.
This is what we have to follow by ordinance. And when this doesn't cover it, we go to Robert's Rules of Order is what I would want, because otherwise I think we're setting ourselves up for a weird legal thing. That's me personally.
that seems
Yeah.
reasonable.
Seems reasonable.
If people have real substantive things that they want to dive into, I mean, I don't want to say we have 10 minutes to talk about this and ignore it. I think we should carve out some time to do that, however.
About the whole document?
Yeah, about the whole document.
Should we spend 10 minutes now? And then if we still have more to say, we can cut it off and bump to another convo?
I'd rather not, because I didn't come into it with that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
idea. I came into it with just those two.
Could we,
I have a draft that I've already started that I went through with highlighting sections and putting in suggested language. So I'd be happy to finish that in a certain specified amount of time and share it with Sophie, and she could do
So if,
what she does to get it out.
if
if-
everybody could do that.
Right.
Great.
If everybody could do that, I would be thrilled to get a draft back out. And if you have conflicting things, I'll just put both of them in and highlight it, and you all can.
could I ask just to sort of help meetings that until we amend the document, that see if we're all willing to work with this policy manual as it exists right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a couple things that I don't think we're doing already right now. So I mean, I guess I'm willing to keep doing what we have been doing, some of which doesn't go with the policy. So what Sophie's pointing out, some things we're doing are not actually what the manual says. So I guess I'm comfortable going the way we've been going, but some things in the manual I don't think are actually accurate or even legal by the charter. And so I have some things on that.
And one of the things that I noticed is that we made some changes within the last year as council that aren't updated in here yet, including doing public comment differently than is outlined here. And so there are some kind of updates that would be great to integrate. And I'm certainly open to like making these two corrections that were proposed today. I'm happy to integrate, and we could do this iteratively if that like makes for less headaches, but I also do want to get to other things that and take the opportunity to update, to just do the updates.
Why don't, I think Sophie's suggestion that we funnel this to her, so
Great.
she can,
I just want to say again, I would be comfortable funneling it to Sophie and you, but I do feel like Sophie reiterated, this is a council document. And so I feel like it needs to have, if you don't want to be that person, we could have could be me or another counselor, but I feel like there needs to be a counselor who's seeing all the things coming in also.
yeah, I think what Sophie was saying was that if it gets around any meeting rules, if we send her the document, she includes all the potential draft changes within the document, and then we vet all of those changes as a council.
Sure, but it also gets around the meeting rules if we send it to Sophie and one other counselor.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm suggesting, is that it be Sophie and
Wanna
one
be
other
revisions
counselor.
chair, Sarah?
I'm happy to have Sophie integrate it, but I still feel like there should be council eyes on that because it's a council manual and I just think that's important, like
Why don't
precedent sort of, so.
The three of us.
Well,
I
it
mean,
can't be three.
it can't
If
be
other
three,
people,
but-
it can be two. It can be you
Okay.
and Sophie, or Leo and Sophie, or Sonia and Sophie, or Dan or me, but only
Well,
one of us.
until we have Finance and Operations Committee Chair, which hopefully will be next week, but with like sooner rather than later. Why don't I be included on those emails? And then when we have a Finance and Operations Committee Chair, I'll step away from that.
That sounds perfect.
Love it.
Okay.
Thanks for stepping in.
I would just save you some work to say if there is an inconsistency, either internal inconsistency or with ordinance, if you want to just point it out to me, I can then scribe, I mean,
Thank you.
unless you want to, because I wouldn't want to step in if I shouldn't.
Good. We're all set. All right, moving on. B, plan to complete town council orientation, required training and work plan development. This is Sophie.
All right, so normally when we impanel a brand new council, there is work that we all have to do. Some of it is check the box work that everybody will roll their eyes when they have to do, but you have to do it. So for some people, there is some required training and policies that went out through ADP that you need to check. You need to read them, you need to understand them. If you have questions, you need to ask those questions. And when you're done, you need to check that you have read, received, and will follow the policies. We have a couple folks who still have outstanding payroll things out there. And that, even if you want to be kind and generous and do this for free, that creates all sorts of payroll headaches for us and non-compliance with the Internal Revenue Service, which I would prefer that we not be in that place. And then when we were doing our research, we don't know if folks maybe went to elected officials training or did the Freedom of Access Act training, but didn't get us the certificate. So what I am proposing is going to send out the link to the frequently asked questions. Everybody here has access to Maine Municipal Association, or you should. If you don't, let me know and we'll try to figure it out. And I'm going to send you the self-certification form. I need the self-certification form back for us to be compliant with state law. If you have questions about right to know, then please let me know, and I will get you whatever answers you need. So that I absolutely need that back.
Are you gonna send it to everybody, or are you gonna send it to everybody that doesn't?
Jeff has seen my color-coded piece of paper. I'm gonna try to make it, if I don't have it from you, I'm gonna send you something.
Great.
I am going to ask Bell to resend the ADP notifications around the policies for people to accept or not
This
accept.
doesn't mean we have to watch a whole, like, couple hour presentation, right? Again,
So all you have to do
We definitely
is
did that last
certify.
year.
Yeah, just certify.
Okay.
If you did give your best estimate, I am trusting that as public officials, you're not gonna lie about that,
Yeah.
right?
It's important for us to know that stuff.
It
Yeah.
is.
Our
It's really
responsibility,
important.
So, yeah.
But the other thing that I have, many of you had the opportunity to meet Matt Tarasevich, who is our Portland labor lawyer. But we actually have a local attorney that we use for most general municipal issues, contracts, land use. He staffs the Board of Appeals, the local Board of Assessment Review, the planning board, if the planning board needed it. He's our local guy. Great guy, one that you will like. But he has agreed to come in. There have been some questions about executive session and how executive session works. So he will be here on the 22nd of May I've asked him to block off an hour from 5 to 6 to talk about executive session. If you have burning other questions around general municipal liability, he's a good person to ask. He does not do labor, because if he did labor, we'd use him instead of, I mean, not that the other guy's bad, but just he's much cheaper, much less expensive. There we go. So that is the plan, to try to get at least some shared understanding of what executive session, what you can do, can't do, that kind of stuff. Also that evening, we have confirmed with the school that school representatives will be here along with our public safety folks to talk about school resource officers and the school resource program here in Orono. So that's part of orientation. I guess the SRO piece is just so you know, we've got 2 awesome things happening on the 22nd. I'm still waiting for a couple of folks to get back to me on the public safety building
Am I one of those?
meeting. I think so.
Okay.
I'm not 100%. I'll have to go back. I know I've got a couple. But we were able to confirm that on the 23rd of May, we are going to do, so the 22nd of May and the 23rd is we have formalized the council workshop.
Oh, what is
Yep, and it is the 23rd from, I have 5 to 6. My sense is it's probably going to end up being more like 5 to 7. But I will make snacks for folks. Well, I won't make them, but I will bring them.
Which one is that? That's the facilitated meeting
Yep.
about, okay.
The work plan session.
The facilities meeting.
The
No,
facilitated
I think it's,
council planning.
right, I think
That's,
yeah.
yep,
Oh,
I was-
facility.
yeah, I was able to get that one.
May 22nd.
I will, Jeff and I have spoken at a little bit length about changing Craig's scope a little bit to include actually drafting the work plan.
Oh, so you may be looking for me on the facilities one too, right? Dang.
I am.
Oh, okay. I thought I was sitting here all cocky, thought I was all good.
No, I thought I filled that.
Okay.
So when it comes to the orientation, we've talked about policies and procedures, that kind of stuff, payroll. But the other thing that we need to get through is our stormwater training and some other basic training. I need to get a sense of how many people here are confident in the cultural competency and implicit bias training that they may have had in the last year. We are trialing a little bit different process here. Maine Municipal Association, we've negotiated with MMA to have access to 2 of their webinars on demand, so that new employees will use those as opposed to the $1,500 crack training. So what I need to know from you all is what you want in terms of that training. I think when we brought the consultant in, when we did the training for all of staff, it was about bringing everybody up to speed. 2 years have gone by. I think it has become more commonplace in people's work lives to have that training. So I don't want to ask you to do more training and spend more time sitting around a table. It's important. So I think we need to make sure people have what they're comfortable with, but.
So would the webinars be something that we do as a group together around a table or something that we each individually do? I'm a little unclear from what you just said.
So what I am suggesting is if people need the training, that would be a way that we could get it to you, and you would get it through ADP would send you a link and you would watch it on your own. I mean, I suppose you could do what the new employees do, which would be to sit and watch it, but I don't know that you have to sit here to do that.
I'm happy to do it anyway. I mean, I just feel like it's really important and we made a big commitment to it as a council. And so I think we need to do it. I'm flexible. So whatever anybody else wants, I'm happy to do any version of it.
So, with a lot of those types of trainings, like there are times that we can workshop and train.
Right.
And the cameras can be on and nobody cares. With that particular training, whether I bring a consultant in or use a multi-use pass for a webinar, they're not, MMA and consultants are not gonna let me broadcast that because that's what they get paid for. So if we wanted to do a workshop, it would be a workshop without a broadcast capability. Or I can shoot people the link to the webinar, which I'm still working on. We just agreed on an annual price, so now I've got to pay it and get the link.
Say webinar.
Webinar?
I vote webinar. If we voted in these meetings.
I think people are responsible enough to watch the webinar on their own, and we can have other conversations about other kinds of training or experiences or speakers that we want to bring in along the way, you know.
And this could also be a question for the DEIB committee is we could ask them if there are resources or trainings that council could think about as a supplement or down the line.
I think that's a great idea because I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, but in the short term, would love access to the webinar and I would look forward to it.
Okay, as soon as I have the link, I will let you know.
Sophie, can I ask a question about the May 23rd meeting?
Sure.
The one that is the facilitated council work plan committee. How was that later? Did I do it that time? I guess I'm just also thinking, isn't that also like where we sort of come to our norms as a council about how we're hoping to be with each other, not just the work plan, but also how we're going to be. So I guess my real question is, could we have a deadline for people getting their feedback about the policy and procedure manual? That's a good time before that. So you have a time to get it back to us. And if there's still remaining things that we don't agree on, we could maybe get it agreed on during that time.
That's a good idea.
Yep, I think part of last time we did 2-hour meetings. The feedback that I kind of received was to try to do it in one. Jeff and I are going to be meeting with Craig Freshly around the scope and the deliverables. So I think from my perspective, I don't know how much time people need. But it would be great if on the 15th is a committee meeting.
May.
Yep.
Okay.
If we could try to have a draft by then. So
Which means we edited it to you a long time before that, so you can get it back out to us, right?
yeah, it would be helpful if I could have it by the end of next week.
Sure.
And that date is, what's the end of next week?
Yeah.
May 5th?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I find deadlines very helpful. Thank you. May 5th to get comments to you on policies and procedures, and then you'll get something back to us a good time before the 15th, so we get a chance to read it again before the 15th, correct? Okay.
Let's slide right into manager's report.
All right. So just when we talk about the draft budget, can I just get an email if you'd like me to drop the budget off to you? Otherwise, I will have it here and people can pick it up or carpool together or walk however you wish to do it. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I missed the beginning.
So the budget is gonna be ready Wednesday.
Mhm.
If I could get emails from folks who would like me to get it delivered to them,
Okay.
that would be helpful. I will tell you the delivery is probably gonna be Ed Lesky. So
Can we just walk over here and get it and save Ed the
that's
trouble?
what I'm saying.
Okay, got
is but if you let me know if that doesn't work for you, we will have him drop it off.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of things. The first is the floodplain ordinance went to the planning board last Wednesday. I attended the meeting. There was nobody else there. I'm not even sure there was anybody online. But there were no comments about the ordinance. The planning board felt like it was kind of cut and dried, which it really is. It was given to us and we were told in order to be in compliance, we had to adopt it. So that would either come back here for more discussion. We have already called a public hearing for the 8th. Is this something that you would like to talk about again on May 1st, or are you all right with it going to public hearing?
I'm good with it going to public hearing.
Good.
Can I ask, is the 8th when we're gonna be doing positions and stuff?
That's my next, it's coming up. I got a couple of other things. June is proclamation month. We normally do Juneteenth and Pride proclamations. Do people need to have me put that on the May 1st agenda for you to wordsmith, or are you fine with what people have done in the past? How would you like to?
I haven't heard a call for any substantive change in how we word either the Pride Proclamation or the Juneteenth Proclamation.
Would you be able to just send them out to us this week? And then if any of us do have, oh, actually, I want to suggest changes, we could let folks know by Thursday and get it on the agenda, but assume that unless you hear otherwise, we can just move ahead with
Yep.
those items.
I can get it out to you. It would be helpful if I knew by Wednesday, because Jeff and I meet Wednesday
Okay,
afternoons to formalize the agenda.
Let you know by this Wednesday.
Yeah, that would be.
Sophie, this is just a procedural question for me. I've been trying to understand because I know we operate by ordinances and orders and motions and resolves. But then in addition to resolutions, there's this term proclamation that isn't in the ordinances anywhere. So I don't really understand. Is
So-
that just a resolution by a different name, or
Yeah,
can we
it's-
get rid of that then and just call them resolutions?
Well,
For lack of confusion?
they are proclamations are formatted a little bit differently, but they are it would either be adopted by an order or resolved to proclaim.
Okay, thanks. So it will become either an order or a resolution. Thank you. That's what I've been trying to understand as I'm reading all of the ordinances. Thank you.
The other question I have is, there are proclamations that go out about Arbor Day and Science Month, and I'm gonna get other, but ones that just Constitution Week, those have historically gone on the consent agenda. Are you looking for Juneteenth and Pride proclamations to be on consent or new business?
I think consent agenda seems fine to me if that's how we handle other proclamations. And especially if we've already looked at and addressed any possible changes to them.
It seems like if there are no.
It seems like if there are changes, then we should bring it up for a vote. And if
no
we
changes.
sort of approve last year's, then consent feels fine.
I agree. If there's no changes, consent. If there are changes people want, then we need a vote.
So my last item that I have listed is just around timing for your process. So I'm not trying to dictate what your process is. But April is the month that Nancy will have all sorts of renewals of committee memberships and recommendations that come in from certain committees about who they would like to see appointed, that kind of stuff. April is normally the month when we would not only have had the leadership vote, but also the committee vote. And as we have adopted, which is going back to the same format that was here when I first got here, that all committees format, it's really mostly about naming chairs, right? Like everybody is kind of on every committee. And But those chairs are important when I'm trying to figure out how to prepare for items that are on the agenda. So I don't know, are you looking to adopt your leadership in May and chairs also in May, or leadership in May and chairs in June after you have the leadership figured out?
I would love to do it all at once. I feel like it would make my life easier to know who was chair of what, and I think it probably would make your life easier. So I personally would be on favor of all at once.
I'm comfortable with that. I was curious, and this isn't a can of worms that I'm married to opening, but it was a question as I was reading the policies and procedures manual, whether we want to keep the all committee format or whether there could be some efficiencies of, actually having committees such that we have fewer meetings to attend. So wanted to see if anyone else wanted to talk about that. And if everyone else is like, no, let's just do the all committees, then consider the can not open.
I actually love a discussion just in general about how our committees, workshops, and council meetings fit together, because for myself, I read the policy and procedure manual and I tried to draw myself a pictogram that you'd give to a middle schooler about here's where it starts and then it goes here and then it goes there. And I discovered that I couldn't do it. I was following them and it didn't make enough sense to me. So I think there is a bigger discussion that we sort of do need to have, but I don't think we have to do that to elect chairs. I think we could just elect chairs and then we could get to that in July when we're done with the budget and we have some room to breathe. That's my own.
Wait till after budget season. I like that.
And are we going to still be on the historic process of not meeting for most of August? Is
I
that?
don't know.
I think that's a good plan because,
I like the sound of it.
yeah, I think that's been our practice. Staff has planned on it. I'd like to respect their time and planning. So, and we've never not been available for emergencies. So
Okay, that's good because I'm gonna be gone most of August.
That's wonderful.
Yay.
Take a vacation.
Take a vacation.
So I'm just trying to kind of figure this out. There is a lot behind the committees and we tried it a different way. And so I think we want to have more time to think about that. I'm just trying to figure out how to get all of this in because it feels like we're not getting a lot accomplished in meetings and we're
Let's
Can we
kick
stick
that
with
down,
yeah.
kick it down the road. I think electing chairs sort of expeditiously at the next meeting makes a lot of sense. And then we can return to the question of
Is that the first?
how committees meet at a later date when it feels like it makes sense to address that. But I don't think it's a priority for me right now.
Kick it till after budget season. So
Yeah.
July, maybe September by the time we get to it, somewhere in there, July or September.
good. All right. Any other questions or comments from the council? Yes, Dan. Yeah.
What are we gonna see on Wednesday, Sophie?
what are you gonna see on Wednesday?
Yeah, I've been
I'll
asking
s-
everybody that looks like they're under 22 if they're going to the Ave on Wednesday. It looks like they're all going.
So we are broadcasting, so I'm not gonna tell you
Yeah.
the whole plan. I will tell you
Sure.
that we too have heard those things and public safety has been working.
Okay.
Thank you.
And have been for a couple of months.
Okay. Hope everybody stay safe.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Belle, is there any public comment?
I don't see anybody with their hand raised.
Thank you. All right. Seeing nothing else, do we need a motion to adjourn or do we just adjourn?
You can just declare it.
Let's adjourn. Thank you very much.
I know.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.